Good evening. Good evening and welcome. Very special occasion as we celebrate the life and legacy of Ron Wommack and hear from some of his colleagues and friends about what Ron meant to them. We're thankful that all of you are here. This is again a very special evening. Still processing Ron's untimely loss this year, but we celebrate his life and the legacy that he brought. And I'll go ahead and just mention a kind of personal story for me, for Ron. 20 years ago, next month, I was waiting for a phone call, and I was a little apprehensive about it, and the phone rang, and it was Ron. He said, "Nate, hi, it's Ron Wommack." And they said, "Would you like to be the director of the Dallas Architecture Forum?" And I had interviewed with the personnel committee for the forum, and Ron was the board president, so he was the one that called me and offered me the job that I've had now for almost 20 years. So Ron was and continues to be a big part of my life, so I'm really grateful for that. And so tonight, as we hear about people and their experiences with Ron, and then we'll have time to share around birthday celebration what he meant to each one of you. And in a minute, we will hear from each of these panelists, and Eureka will introduce the panelists, but I'm now very pleased to get to introduce Eureka Francisco. Eureka Francisco is an architect and an urban designer committed to quality of cities, including, of course, Dallas. The design principal at Perkins & Will, his work has been recognized with over 20 awards, both nationally and internationally. In addition, Eureka has a long history of leadership and advocacy in the design community. A graduate of Harvard University and the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil, he has taught design studios at the University of Sao Paulo, Boston Architecture College, Rhode Island School of Design, and Texas Tech. Eureka is a contributing editor for Texas Architect magazine, and most recently served as jury chair of the 2023 AIA Healthcare Design Awards. Originally from Sao Paulo, Eureka has lived in Dallas now for 25 years, so he's very definitely a Texan Brazilian. Eureka is active in civic and professional organizations that work to elevate the quality of life in urban environments. He's been active in Dallas AIA, the Texas Society of Architects, and he's the chair of the City of Dallas Urban Design Peer Review Panel. Eureka is also a valued longtime member of the Forum Board of Directors, and he is currently our board president, so we are very thankful for that. So now please join me in welcoming my friend and moderator for this evening's panel, Eureka Francisco.
Thank you, Nate. Thank you, Nate, and good evening, everybody. So good to see full house, almost, well, not quite full, but a lot of good people here tonight. So good to see everybody. However, I have to say this is an event that I would have preferred not to have. Ron Wommack left us way too soon a few months ago, and so we are here tonight to celebrate Ron's life and to honor his memory. I would prefer not to have this event, and I would prefer instead to be around Ron, talking about architecture, talking about life, and listening to his stories, and I suspect you all feel the same way. Ron was one of a kind. Above all, he loved being an architect. He was so engaged with our profession, so devoted to it, so interested in it, that sometimes it seemed that architecture is all that he cared about. But of course, that wasn't the case. Ron also was a loyal friend. He loved being around people, and he was endlessly curious about everything that was happening around us: culture, history, psychology, technology, you name it. Ron wanted to be around people, but he didn't need to be the center of attention. He didn't seek the spotlight. And for him, it was enough to be in the present, listening, beaming with joy whenever there were friends around. His friends, in turn, loved being with him. Ron loved architecture, he loved his friends, and he loved books. His personal library is legendary, and it was common for Ron to show up for coffee or lunch with a new book to share and to get conversation going. I was lucky to have received at least a couple of books as gifts from Ron. And this one right here, The Eyes of the Skin by Palasma, was a gift not long after it was published in 2005. And I remember how Ron was entranced by it, as Palasma makes the case that we should engage with great architecture with all our senses, beyond just vision. It was something that Ron clearly believed in, and that went along with the way that he lived, where life and architecture are forever intertwined. So, I said earlier that this is an event that I would prefer not to have, as I'd rather have Ron still with us today. But since Ron isn't with us anymore, we are going to honor him and his memory by doing what he loved most. We, as friends, will talk about architecture and ideas, and we will tell stories to each other. Everything that Ron loved, and exactly the stuff, exactly the glue that creates community that we all need and value. To do that, tonight we have some of the best minds in architecture with us. Russell Buchanan, Max Levy, Josh Nimmo, and Dan Shipley. Each one of them will first share some images and stories, and right after that we'll have a chance to ask questions and to have a conversation, just like Ron would have liked. Sounds good? All right. I will now introduce our speakers, starting with Russell. Russell Buchanan began practicing architecture in 1983 after attending Texas A&M. In 1988, Russell joined Cunningham Architects as a project architect. He contributed to a number of award-winning projects while at Cunningham, most notably the Edison Conference Center and Theater and Cistercian Chapel. In 1992, he founded Russell Buchanan Architect, which became later Buchanan Architecture. His work to date represents a wide range of project types, including single-family and multifamily residential, hospitality, commercial, municipal, historic preservation, and exhibition projects. Notable award-winning projects include Envelope, Elements, and Oak Court, which received the National Trust for Historical Preservation Award in 2008. And I should have advanced the slide over here. Today, Russell continues to practice architecture, design furniture, create artworks, and teach as an adjunct professor at the University of Texas at Arlington. He's also founding member of the Dallas Architecture Forum and served on its board of directors. Our next speaker is going to be Max Levy. Max Levy, FAIA, established his studio in Dallas in 1984. His work has been recognized by local, state, national, and international design awards, and has been widely published. He has lectured at such institutions as the Kimball Art Museum, the San Diego Museum of Contemporary Art, the National Arts Club in New York. In 2017, he received the O'Neill Ford Medal, Texas' highest commendation for design achievement. Through it all, he has maintained a faith in the simple power of drawing, writing, and model making to deepen one's work. The next speaker is going to be Josh Nimmo. Josh has been driven to create for as long as he can remember. He leads Nimmo in its journey to design an enduring architecture that invites moments of profound human experience in contexts ordinary and extraordinary. Josh founded Nimmo in 2009. His goal, then and now, is to nurture a firm where he authentically can live his values as an architect, with clients and a team who are interested in discovering deeper layers of meaning and problem-solving in progressive architecture. Josh's approach to design reflects a sincere appreciation for raw, basic materials and a continuous search for architectural honesty. Josh has led Nimmo to 8 design awards from the Dallas chapter of the American Institute of Architects and he has served as a featured panelist, lecturer, and juror in Dallas and beyond. And finally, rounding up our speakers, we'll have Dan Shipley. Dan Shipley, FAIA, grew up in San Antonio and attended architecture school at the University of Texas at Austin. After working several years as carpenter and draftsman in Angelina County in East Texas, he moved to Dallas in 1980. After 5 years with Thomas and Buziotis Architects, 4 years with Metro Architects, and 2 years with HKS, he founded Shipley Architects in 1991. In its 31 years of existence, Shipley Architects has typically consisted of 2 to 5 licensed architects working on a variety of projects, including residential, multifamily, private schools, and public work. Please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Russell Buchanan.
Thank you. Thank you, Eurico. Thank you to the Dallas Architecture Forum, and in particular to Nate and Jean for putting this important program together. Also, thank you to my fellow panelists, and in particular Max Levy, for including me in this discussion. It's an honor for me to be here with you this evening. Tonight, we're here to celebrate the architectural legacy of Ron Wommack. And I'd like to start by showing you some of his work together with some of our work so that you can see how much influence he had on us, and as a way for me to pay homage to a fellow architect and friend. Sorry about that, but you did get a preview. In doing so, I'd like to thank Ron for sharing his wisdom, his inspiration, his encouragement, and his passion for architecture with us. I'd like to thank Ron for his ideas about arrival and a sense of entry. The images of Ron's work are in the center left, while images of our work are to the right. This is the D. Mitchell residence on Bermuda, and it's my favorite Ron Wommack project. I'd like to thank Ron for his ideas about the importance of shadows, making us see a flat surface come alive in dynamic and interesting ways as the sun moves across the big Texas sky. I'd like to thank Ron for his ideas about filtered light, helping us to better understand that seeing everything may not be as valuable as only seeing part of it, creating a sense of wonder and mystery. I'd like to thank Ron for his ideas about composition. This is the Buena Vista townhomes, showing us that architecture can be seen as a series of simple elements composed to make a whole, that architecture is art, and that everything matters. I'd like to thank Ron for his ideas about shared spaces, that sometimes it's not about where you are, but about what is beyond. And that sometimes seeing through spaces can be as interesting as being in them. I'd like to thank Ron for his ideas about glowing light, reminding us of the power of light as it gives form and illuminates surfaces, letting our imagination wonder about solids and voids, lightness and darkness, positive and negative. I'd like to thank Ron for his ideas about covered patios. This is the Douglas residence, about creating spaces that extend from inside to outside, about exploring ideas of transparency, filtered light, and the importance of connected spaces. I'd like to thank Ron for his ideas about awnings and trellises, inspiring us to look upward, to imagine spaces with structures that magically float above us. I'd like to thank Ron for his ideas about shade. This is the McKinney farmhouse, showing us the function and beauty of a trellis structure, using crisp edges to define spaces through the filtered sun. I'd like to thank Ron for his ideas about combining elements to create sculptural spaces, showing us how to use simple forms to create memorable and dynamic shapes. I'd like to thank Ron for caring about the details, for understanding that architecture is only as good as the details that hold it together, for placing value on every aspect of design. And I'd like to thank Ron for his ideas about the poetry of architecture, for bringing joy to the world through his vision of a well-designed space. Thank you, Ron.
Well, I too thank everybody that's been mentioned tonight, and I'm really honored to be here. I didn't do that detail. Not long ago, idly scrolling through the architectural internet at breakfast, I came upon these two images of a balcony railing in Venice by Carlos Scarpa. Scarpa was a hero of Ron's and mine. And I just sort of involuntarily found myself saying, I gotta send this to Ron. This sort of thing, as y'all know, sometimes happens when you lose somebody. It takes a while for it to fade away. Ron and I used to, in order to keep in touch, we used to send images to each other from time to time. And then every once in a while we'd get together for lunch and talk about them. This is kind of typical of how we stayed connected. And we talked a lot about Carlos Scarpa, his beauty and madness of his work, and all of that elaboration, we concluded was Scarpa's way of exercising the joy of being alive. And the joy of being alive is something that really came through Ron's work and his life. I'm fortunate that the last time I was with Ron, which was just a couple of weeks before he left us, we spent a day together. We went out to a job site of mine about an hour southeast of Dallas. It's a project that Ron had followed from a distance on paper, but he'd never actually been out there. I was doing the punch list. We were padding around the house in our socks, and I just thought I'd show you the project we walked through and some of the things we talked about that day. The project is a weekend retreat for an extended family. And it's a little compound of buildings. All of the interiors of all the buildings are wood siding painted white. This is a little study model of a piece of one of the buildings. It's on wooded acreage, lots of birds out there. I wanted the buildings to somehow acknowledge the birds. And so what you see here is just an idea of a detail that sort of apologizes to the birds for invading their sanctum. This is just a birdhouse mounted outside of a window and pointed back towards the window. All the buildings are just utterly elementary gabled boxes. And each room of this house is a separate little building. So we could minimize the cutting down of trees. And you see they're just about as elementary as they can get. It's just corrugated metal roof and walls, and as I say, the animating features become these bird details that you'll see in a moment. Materials just sort of melt into the woods visually. And so over the years, Ron and I had often talked about the idea of just a few thoughtful details being able to bring a spark of life to a building. And the reason we talked about this is that buildings are just getting so expensive that maybe the idea is that you make the overall building just as simple as it can be, and then through the inspiration of Scarpa, come back and just do a few touches with details. Now, none of these details I'm showing you are going to be anything like Carlos Scarpa. They're really simple, but they do have a spark of life to them. All different sizes of birdhouses, generally mounted outside of windows. There's a condo for purple martins or house wrens. In addition to the birdhouses, we want to do some bird baths. And incidentally, most of the bird details are coupled with window seats. So here it is. This one is 4 feet in diameter, and it's just 3/4 of an inch deep at the middle of that dish. Hummingbird feeders. There are 5 of these brackets that cantilever off of a screen porch, and we just took a laboratory flask, turned it upside down, and used a commercially available stopper and feeder tube. When we were out there, Ron was commenting on the fact that if we had gone to a store and bought, a commercially available red, green, and blue plastic hummingbird feeders and put them out there, it just would have broken the spell of the whole place. And I think that's true. Modernism, far from being a strong form of design, is actually very delicate. And so you've got to keep the thing in tune constantly. And then because the buildings are just almost featureless, I wanted the birds to be able to land on the building in a way, and just had this idea of doing a perch, taking a branch, mounting it outside a long window, and it turns out that the living dining kitchen pavilion had this 30-foot long window, and we harvested a branch and cantilevered it out there. This is that outdoor shower. You may have seen that cylindrical form in the overall elevation, kind of in the center of the little compound. And Ron pointed out that we really did a no-no here. Our masonry is run vertically. Anyway, you never run the mortar joints vertically. But he agreed that it looked like kind of a prehistoric petrified tree trunk, which, so I was absolved of this crime. And this was Ron's favorite view. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I have a little bit different perspective than some of the panelists. Ron was, rather than a peer of mine, he was more of a hero. And we had we were fortunate to have him come to our office a couple of years ago and critique one of our projects that was in the very early design stages. This is Ron cracking a joke, us all laughing. None of this is Ron's work, but this work is actually done by my fellow panelists. Again, just like Ron, I followed their work and am honored to be a part of this discussion. Sketching. And one of the things I've done with these slides, basically we had recorded and videotaped that crit session, and I went back and played it a few times and just took some sound bites from Ron and let that kind of inform the slides that we chose to use. This is a sketch done by Ron. I remember him making a point that he felt like his hand was sort of an extension of his subconscious, and his hand kind of knew where he was going before he knew where he was going. That's something that's always been important to us as a practice. It's kind of using your hand, keeping things ambiguous, and not kind of locking into ideas too early on is something that's important to us in our practice. I remember right before moving to Dallas, coming across this project actually done by Stephen Hull, and what was enlightening to me as a young designer is that this was a building, and I think maybe it's common sense to most designers, but to me it was enlightening, and that was that buildings are not just put together with solid walls, windows, and a roof, that there are other elements that contribute to the experience of architecture. In this case, it was this veil-like quality, this perforated copper panels that were used in this project. I very distinctly remember seeing some of Ron's projects online. I remember, so I was in Oklahoma, by the way, 2003, and I saw some of his work online. I reached out to him, and he actually called me back, and he gave me a lot of advice. I remember just being tickled that he did that. And what over the years, I've heard that same story over and over from architects my generation and younger. Ron was always generous with his time. But I remember these sunscreens, and that again, like the whole project, that started to influence me, and started, to me, it talked about if I look at the sunscreen and how it almost kind of extends the indoor space outdoors, and I think of it almost like a musical note. So in music, like let's say you're playing piano, you hit a key, you let off, the note goes away. To me, a sunscreen is almost like hitting the key and letting it just sort of fade. And I think about that, it offers this opportunity to kind of expand what the architectural experience can be. I remember this project, I think it was around 2007 when I saw this project. It was, I remember it winning an award, and and going through all the slides, and we've seen this slide, and I know in Russell's slideshow, but it just taught me about, you have this simple rectangular form, and then all of a sudden this one little element, it extends the interior space, and it completely changes the experience with this light kind of floating, almost gravity-defying element. I can remember this detail. I remember when I saw it, it was the colors, it was the lighting, and we could go through and talk about every little detail literally for hours of this project, and just how much effort went into pulling off a space like this. Projects like this, and the sunscreen specifically, in our critique, Ron mentioned that he was a very pragmatic designer, and he learned that from Frank Welch, his mentor. And I believe he used sunscreens because he wanted to provide spaces, he wanted to provide shade to outdoor spaces, and that was a very pragmatic decision. But in doing so, he created an element and a language that sort of allowed him to create designs that had so much depth. And in this case, you can see a roof form that goes from solid to from a solid roof form to a trellis to a solid roof form, and provides just this great experience of depth and this object kind of floating in the landscape. It is not a coincidence that in our work, this elements like these have made their way into our projects. I remember in the presentation, Ron talked about experiencing architecture and the idea of a procession and the idea of making your way through a site, and again, really thinking about architecture as an experience more than architecture as an object. This idea is, and it reminds me of ideas that have been kind of floating around in our office. And to go back to this idea of a musical composition, when you get elements like this, like the sunscreen, for instance, it allows you to start to look at architecture in a very kind of fluid way. And with this project in particular, the big idea, one of the big ideas was about moving through space and providing moments of compression, moments of expansion. So the project that Ron was critiquing, it happened to be on a very interesting site, quite undulating, a lot of trees, and Ron kept gravitating towards the notion of maybe just a single bar in the landscape. And that resonated to us. That type of work resonates with us. This is a project we have that's under construction in Martha's Vineyard, but it's about 500 feet off the shoreline, just a tree-lined, just after about 500 feet, it's completely forested. And the solution for us was just a simple bar, again, in the landscape. The last few slides go back to our meeting with Ron, and specifically the project that he was critiquing. This is the site. It slopes about 20 feet from. It's about half of an acre, slopes about 20 feet from one corner to the next. It was interesting to me. Another soundbite from Ron was, he said, today we live in a culture that is kind of overstimulated. And something of real simplicity and silence is what he's always trying to work for these days. A silence, he said. I'm tired of the noise. Noise is like being lost and searching for something. Which I think is funny, as young designers, we are always, it's funny, we're always searching, and one of the things I think we're maybe guilty of in our practice is we have the ability, especially with the use of computers, to study multiple ideas very rapidly, and for me, Ron really kind of made me think about that notion of, and I remember him saying, like, I don't have time, Josh, to study 15 ideas. I only have time to really flesh out one good idea. And so that is something that was interesting to me, and a point that I'm considering as we move forward in evolving our practice. The last slide I'm going to end on, so this project is under construction. This is a rendering, but ultimately where we landed was this sort of forested like environment. We're really trying to tread lightly on the site. We have these two kind of simple bars, and really we zeroed in on two schemes in our conversation with Ron. This was one of them, and so it's great to kind of feel like he had a part in this project moving forward. Okay.
Last time I saw, excuse me, last time I saw Ron back in May, he says, hey, Dan, got anything under construction that we can go see? And I said, yeah, I do have something that's coming up out of the ground in about a month and a half, and I think you'd be really interested in it. Well, that site visit did not happen. So, sort of in honor of Ron, who loved visiting construction sites, I'll take us through the site visit that Ron didn't get to make. This is Marathon, Texas, down north of Big Bend. It's 500 miles from Dallas, and of course Ron had been totally on board for a road trip, particularly through his beloved West Texas. The project I'll show you is right in the middle of the town. This is the Marathon Public Library, circa 1950, same as Ron, as a matter of fact. This is the distinction of being the smallest public library in the state of Texas, but not for long. So this is what the site looked like in June when it was just coming out of the ground. And so there's the original building there, unchanged over 70 years except for that unfortunate hat. Ron loved all types of architecture, but he really had a soft spot for the ordinary, everyday, modest building. And when he would have seen this project, he would have expressed concern about the fate of this building and whether or not it was going to be obliterated by the new building. So Ron and I, in a previous visit to another job site, we kind of talked about just what it is, about the importance of what the value is in job sites, just what's going on. And for me, it's the whole notion of ideas really meeting and often colliding with reality. The reality of gravity, of weather, of indifference, of mistakes and misunderstandings. You know, as architects, our ideas are go out into the world in the form of these drawings and specifications that are weightless. They have no weight. And then after a while, the ideas come back to a specific place, and suddenly they have weight, mass, and they have consequence also. It takes one person to draw this glue laminated beam. It takes 8 guys to move it into position so it can be hoisted up. You know, this is sort of the implicit agreement. These guys, we rely on them to build the project, and they rely on us to actually have all this stuff figured out. Because, man, this beam is heavy and it is hot out here. I love this photo of the conquering hero standing atop the beam. It's actually great to, on job sites, to see the sense of accomplishment that the carpenters, that the people have, particularly when they perceive that they may be working on something that's a little different, maybe a little bit more special. This building is a construction, it's a combination of gingerbread house and Amish barn raising. Except here the Amish don't wear hats, they wear tattoos instead of shirts. And they smoke and they have this Skytrack. But it's very satisfying to build this way, because in 3 weeks you can go from an empty slab to a dried-in building. So what we're building really is not a library. We're building we're making a building that could be used as a library. You know, lots of natural light. Eventually all be indirect natural light. Across the roof, we have these monitors that capture the north light. So this would have been Ron's very, very favorite part. He loved a crisp box. His second favorite thing was steel pipes. We'll come to that in a minute. In many ways, I feel like I was sort of channeling Ron and a lot of the things that he's interested in. Same things I am, and I learn things from him. Maybe he learns things from me. I don't know, but I think he would have really enjoyed being at this, visiting this project. So here you can see that the original building does not get obliterated. It actually becomes the centerpiece of the new entry sequence. And it becomes framed by the new porch. And so it's given, in this new version of the library, it now has new significance. So this is really sort of the very best part of the job site. And the details, seeing the details come to life. Here things are being clamped in place, everything's kind of being studied to see what adjustments need to be made. All the details to me are very practical, and they are all sort of add up to support the, the whole thing, the finished thing. Here we're doing the same thing, looking at the wood, kind of mocking it up. Things are sort of tacked in place while we're making adjustments to everything before everything gets kind of nailed down. It's really the materials. That's really the fun part. This is what you see, and this is what everything that we've done up to this point allows this to happen in this sort of tailored kind of way. These materials show up on the site. They just show up, and they all speak their own language. They're not interested in simulation. They're not interested in compromise. And you can't change them. They have their own nature, and you're out of luck. You're going to be disappointed if you tried to change the nature of any of these materials. So it really becomes the problem of the building. The building itself has to speak the common language that allows all these materials to be understood. Here's the all-important outside corner. So fun walking through projects with Ron and under construction because he's a great digressor. Everything he sees reminds him of something. If we drove to Marathon together, it'd take us days to get there because there'd be so many side trips of things he would want to show me. We'd spend 2 days in Abilene, probably. Ron is very social, and he had a great respect for the people who build buildings. And he would have talked to every one of these guys and probably known the names of half of them, maybe all of them, by the time our visit was finished. This is the only photo of kind of that shows a little bit of the whole building. And I put this one in there. I was really wanting to show fragments, but I wanted to show this is right out of Ron's playbook. And this is probably me channeling Ron. But it's all about, the word pragmatic has come up. I would say Ron was very practical. I feel that I'm the same way. And if you're practical, relentlessly practical, it sets you up so that just through rhythm and proportion, you can end up with something that might be kind of beautiful. Pragmatism and practicality don't mean you can't have any fun. So at the entrance, this is the new porch. At the entrance, that array of steel pipes is really an upside down cattle guard. This is cattle country. And as Ron would probably do it, it's set up, it faces, so it's always, it faces north, so there's always going to be a shadow cast. So any visitor to the library on a sunny day will cross the projected cattle guard. The virtual cattle guard is the threshold. Ron would have picked up on all this, so whatever you have to tell him, he would just see it. And beyond in this photo, that's the one-room schoolhouse. That's sort of the next phase of this project. It will become a museum. So that's the last slide. I want to say that Ron was ubiquitous. He was everywhere. He was at the School of Architecture. He was at the home tour. He worked on the fellowship program. He was at every forum event, the guy in front with his hand up asking the first question. I feel like he ought to be right here asking a question. It's easy to take Ron for granted because he's everywhere. And so like so many things that you take for granted, you really miss them once they're gone. So thank you, Ron.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Josh, Max, Russell. So nice to listen to you, to hear your stories, to connect back with Ron. Why don't we continue that right now? Here, what if we all come to the front and let us continue the conversation. And by the way, I only have a couple of questions here. I was so taken by their presentations. I would like you to be part of the conversation. So please line up your questions to these guys, okay? But just to get things started, one thing that comes to mind, Max, you and Ron, well, almost all of you, except Josh, that was still in school when this whole thing started. But Max, you shared a long time professionally with Ron, and he was, as we heard, as we know, as we remember him, he was always upbeat. However, the reality of a professional life is harsh. If you are a sole practitioner, even if you're not, it is always harsh. How do you think that he managed to keep upbeat in face of the harsh reality of professional life, maintaining a practice?
Yeah, can y'all hear me? You know, the first picture that they showed of Ron here, that big square photograph, he's got a little smile on his face. Those of you who knew him, he always had that little smile on his face. And I asked him about that once because I knew he had gone through some rough stuff. And he explained it this way. He said early on, he realized that his talents were greater than the caliber of the projects he was getting. That his talents were greater than the number of projects he was getting. He was sliding into bitterness, and then that slides into envy about all of his colleagues. And he said he just didn't want to spend the rest of his life being cynical while he was trying to get somewhere in architecture. He just made the decision. He said he realized one day that the architectural world that we all inhabit is so rich. It's just such a blessing to be playing in this world. And so it was just gratitude for just being a part of the architectural world. And by that he meant, you know, the just captivating world of architecture books, which are endless, as you all know. Endless on the pocketbook too. But, the love of coming to lectures like the forum, the love of interacting with colleagues, the love of Teaching, he was a great teacher. The students loved him. He was a gentle soul, but he was actually a guy of few words, but they were good words. He was a tireless traveler. He loved to go travel and go see stuff and call up colleagues to go on field trips to see their projects, which is, you think about this is no small item. If you don't have work, to then want to go see something that one of your fellow architects is doing, to overcome that envy with gratitude is, to me, that was Ron's superpower and his inspiration. I remember one time talking to him about another one of our heroes, Louis Kahn, who, there was a 20-year period in Kahn's career where he didn't have any work. And somebody once asked him, how did you get through that? How did you keep your spirits up? And Kahn replied, as only Kahn could, I lived in a land called Le Corbusier. And what he was referring to, I later learned, is that, he's referring to that wonderful 7-volume encyclopedic set of Kahn's complete works, of Korb's complete works. And so if you've never seen that set of books, you need to take a look at it. It is just endlessly inspiring. Everything's in there. Every bit of modernism's in there. So I would say that Kahn's little smile is the smile of a contented citizen of the land of Le Corbusier.
There you go. Thank you, Max. It does sound like Ron. Now, Josh, I was taken by the story that you said that you shared with us, that when you called Ron in 2003 from Oklahoma, he called you back, and I have a similar story. I also called him out of the blue. He didn't know who I was, but yes, he picked up the phone, and yes, he agreed to meet with me just to chat, which was, how does it happen? But anyway, that shows how generous he was. And from that moment that you shared, that first contact that you had in 2003, it seemed that despite being from different generations, as you are, you managed to overlap in terms of the architecture that you both created, produced, and you continue to produce. Have you thought about, of course you have thought about, can you elaborate a little more on that? Different generations, different places, different schools, different time, yet there is an overlap. How does it happen?
Yeah. I'm recalling something that Ron said again to me that was enlightening to me and refreshing to me. It was very clear to me that Ron had convictions about architecture, and I look at that and I look at a designer with convictions, and it just seems so liberating to kind of feel that it needs to be a certain way and then go about producing that without questioning it. And when I contrast kind of my work and compare that, I'm working to get there, to get in that place that Ron was in. I remember intentionally, I went out on my own in 2009, and I remember intentionally saying to myself, I'm going to keep an open mind about design and what's important and what's not. And I almost looked at the practice like I look at the design process. I wanted to get to the point where someday where I had this conviction and I'm working towards that. And that started in a place of ambiguity. I started sketching like what's important. And intentionally the work that was developed, I almost looked at them like study models and evolving what's important. And I look forward to getting to that place where I feel like he was. And he reminded me of the importance of that in that meeting. I'll leave it at that.
Russell, you on your talk, you mentioned the big Texas sky fascination, your fascination, his fascination, Ron's fascination with that. And Max, we all know of your fascination with the Texas sky. I will never forget the way that you described seeing the Texas sky through the slit of the Kimball under construction. Do you remember that? You were a student and you visited the building and you told us the story. So that's an image that I was not there to see it like you did, but I can picture when I close my eyes. So, Russell, Max, Ron, tell us about the big Texas sky.
It's really big. You know what strikes me about how Ron embraced that whole idea. You know, he's from Abilene, so he knew more than any of us what it's like to be under the dome of the big Texas sky. It's just an endless, breathtaking, endless blue sky. And what I really gravitated to when I was putting the presentation together was what I think almost became a real signature of Ron's work, which was the trellis. And he used that trellis effectively on a wide range of projects, both small residential, multifamily, and even commercial projects. And I really felt like he understood fully how to take advantage of and what the benefit of having the big Texas sky be a part of your work. And you could tell in the photography that he understood. He knew exactly what he was doing when he introduced the trellis as an idea, and then when they executed the trellis, he already knew what that was going to do to one of his projects. And in rolling through project after project, you could see how he would manipulate it and change it, I'm sure, for reasons like where the sun is coming from, what time of day it is. But all of it was tied to his joy of the big Texas sky. That was just a part of his ethos, and one that I really admire.
And of course, when you describe it like that, I think of the photograph that you shared, that you shared with us of the trellis facing south, the sun rather facing north, the sun coming from the south, projecting the shadow on the ground. How did you say, the cattle guard?
It's called a cattle guard.
The projected cattle guard. I love that. You and Ron started your practice more or less at the same time, late 80s, early 90s, somewhere there. And can you tell us, you two have been in contact since that time. How was the relationship? What did you exchange? Did you what stories did you exchange? Did you exchange details, construction details? You both are fascinated and masters of the craft of the detail. How was it? A small practice happening at the same time, becoming known at the same time. What did you talk about?
Well, guess this is working. I'd known Ron since he first came to Dallas, and he came with Frank Welch's office, and that's when he and a couple of the guys that came down here, they joined our softball team. We were a pretty lousy team, but Ron brought up our level a fair amount. A couple of those guys did, came from West Texas. We were always, and I think it's just, I would be surprised sometimes to see what Ron was doing. Maybe he was surprised to see what I do. We weren't, talking that much. We'd see each other and talk to each other. But I think it was just kind of a similar interest that led to sort of similar work. We both, when D. Mitchell was interviewing architects for his house, the house that Josh showed, I think we were the final two to be considered for the job. And then when Ron got it, well, I just quit talking to him. No, that's not true. Ron's always been great to see Ron and bump into Ron, and he's just so he's just full of information, and I wanted to show this, pretend we're walking through a job site with him, because that's a lot of fun, and he's just like I said, he's just a fountain of digression, and always backing off and seeing where this thing is, what this thing is doing. It reminds him of something, and it just goes on and on and on.
It's great. Well, as I said, we want you all to participate in the conversation. So, questions? Who's gonna be the first? Yes, over there. No, you? Yes.
Well, Ron was a visiting professor when I was in graduate school at UT Arlington, and he was such a sweet person, and that was very distinctive to have that experience at that time. For someone to care so much about us individually as people, rather than trying to destroy us or break us down and make us make sure that we cared enough. He was such a sweet person, and at our jury he cried, and it was funny because we're used to crying, He cried from just the heartfeltness of the experience that he was. Okay, I'm saying that. That's the way I perceived it. The reason why he was crying was just he was so touched by the experience and like the connection that he had with us, and that was wonderful for us. But I haven't seen him a lot since then, and that was a while ago. And I was so curious about these ideas he had about the university, and just like excited about his vision, whatever that was. I don't know if people know about that or want to share some insight about his vision for the future and what he thinks we need, what we needed, what he wanted to do. Because I love that continued inspiration and hearing about that, because I knows.
That is true. Ron had a passion for teaching, as we all know, and lately he had this idea of a new school of architecture in town. What did he tell you guys?
Well, the last time I spoke with Ron, when we talked about this project I showed, we talked about we'd been talking about the School of Architecture, and he mentioned that talk that he was no longer teaching there because he didn't have a master's degree. And so I pointed out to Ron that not to feel bad about that, because he is now in the same category as O'Neill Ford, Carlos Scarpa, Frank Lloyd Wright. I don't think any of them would be allowed to teach at UTA. So it's UTA's loss.
Is Joy, where's Joy? Oh, there. Yeah, we talked about this a little bit last night. Joy very wisely suggested to Ron that the idea of an architecture school, trying to start an architecture school in Dallas would be a pretty heavy lift. And she suggested, why don't you just try to establish an institute, which I thought was brilliant. She told me that that was the thing that animated him the most the last few months of his life. He considered the prospect of succeeding in that goal as his true legacy.
And that goes to show that, yes, architecture was his central passion, but people and students and colleagues and learning was right there, up there, close to architecture. And he was, as one of you said, social. He was truly social. He loved being around people.
I should add, this has been on my mind for a couple of years now about him, speaking of joy. It's ironic that the idea of exercising or expressing a joy of life through work is one thing. I think it's ironic that Ron married a woman named Joy.
That's a beautiful story, beautiful note. Other questions? Who else? Yes, up there.
So the construction process is pretty difficult and tedious, especially when trying to build out some of these designs, even though they're very modern, it's very simple, and there's always a lot of headache and like drama in the process. And I've worked with some of you guys, and also with Ron. In all the cases, regardless of how much tension there is in the process, it seems like all of you have been able to kind of like stay calm and kind of redirect the energies in those situations, and it's common between all of you. I'm wondering if there, if any of you have any perspective on how you gain that ability to just really stay focused on the project at hand and also hold reverence to the project on a larger scale.
Would like to take that one first.
How do we stand it? Josh?
Well,
you and Dan are sort of solving it by being your own contractors, aren't you?
actually we are. I wasn't thinking about that, but yeah, we actually have started a construction arm with some of our build partners. Where my mind was going was just how do you get things built, period, as an architect. And I'm thinking, like, how do you make that happen? I think it's there's just stick-to-itiveness, but there's also, I think for me, it's a constant kind of pivoting and doing what you need to do to progress and to build, and that's something that's probably innate in all of us designers, is just wanting to create something and build something and doing what it takes to do that. So maybe it's how do you do it? Maybe it's just you have to do it, and it's a marathon.
I think the key is stubbornness. When you design, you invest so much time into a project, thinking about it, living with it sometimes for years before it even starts to get built. And I always, when I design a project, I'm always thinking about one project will be different from another project. I'm always thinking about the circumstances, how it's going to get built, who might build it, where it's going to get built, how it's going to get built, because that all plays into the design and how you detail it, and that's how you avoid still always frustration, but that's how you avoid it. We don't really have any kind of a signature style other than a lot of emphasis on materiality, I guess. But every project's different. Every client is different. But thinking about the circumstances of how something gets built, where it gets built, the climate where it gets built, that's always very helpful to keep you realistic.
If I can add actually to that, Dan's reminding me, it's funny, a lesson that I learned from Dan and I've latched onto ever since he said it years ago, was he just mentioned, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but I feel like what he was telling me was he was designing within the context. Part of the way he was designing was in the context of who was going to be building the project. And that's something we think about a lot. We throw around the word context a lot, but a big part of our context is that lesson. It's thinking forward. Who is going to be the one making this thing happen?
The fellow up there that asked this question is an excellent craftsman himself. And so I would answer his question by saying, as long as there are few of him on any job, you can get through it. And I'm not just saying that just to try to get you to give me a lower price. I mean, I think keeping your eyes on the prize is what keeps us calm. The prize is so wonderful, and getting there is so painful. But if it's this issue of joy, the kind of joy of being alive in the world. It's worth the struggle. And pretty early on any job site, you can tell which of the subs are kind of waking up to this thing is special. Some of them will really be grumbling. They don't want to do anything special. And you just sort of learn how to get around them or avoid them or trick them into doing better work. But as I say, as long as there are a couple of good craftsmen on the job, they'll often kind of take possession of the job in a way. They're proud of it. And I think that's what probably keeps us calm. Also, I think one thing that keeps us calm is the alternative is just awful. I mean, if we become angry and nervous wrecks, that's probably going to take up permanent residence in the project, or the projects, the wheels are going to go in the ditch if we lose our cool.
Okay, with that, let's keep our cool. And Nate has made a sign that it's about time for us to finish the conversation here on the stage, but tomorrow is Ron Wommack's birthday, and we have cake in the lobby for all of us. Why don't we continue the conversation from here to the stage, from the stage in the lobby right now? Good? Thank you all for coming.